Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hello, welcome. I have some coffee, so I'm feeling good. How about you guys?
Coffee.
I have some throat coat tea, still dealing with all of that. So,
I made some weak green tea, so right there with you.
Yeah, echinacea for
It's
the
like
win.
drinking dirt. Like, I love green tea, but weak green tea is just dirt water.
Well, I had full strength already, and I don't want to go 2 cups because that's
dirt water.
Because you're old now
way
and
past
caffeine
midnight.
after.
Now I thought, wait a minute, dirt water, isn't that like the mushroom coffee or
Mud water?
Mud water.
I threw that out there. I knew somebody was going to bite on that. Anybody have any? I don't want to get us off topic, but I'm gonna. Anybody have any experience with mud water? I've been very curious about this.
My sister thinks it's cool.
Okay,
but she's wrong about a lot.
You said not directly. I was like, I watched a guy drink some one time.
What kind of face did this person make after consumption? Yeah.
There's actually a chemical in green tea that
makes you cool. I know.
Actually, yes.
It's working.
It's called L-theanine. L-theanine.
Mm-hmm.
It's able to cross the blood-brain barrier, and it's associated with feelings of mild euphoria, boosted mood, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been shown, I think, in clinical trial. I don't know why I say I think. It's been shown in clinical trials to reduce depression in the subset of people who enjoyed it. And so I've gotten into tea really heavily in the last couple of months. And there are people who describe the feeling as being like, quote, tea drunk, where you have this kind of like goofy, happy, lifted feeling. And I've experienced it myself. Going through some troubling times in the last couple of months, I would drink some and just feel a little reprieve. So if you haven't, green tea is the highest in it, but there are other ones that have it too. And there's other teas too that have other types of chemicals. And within the Eastern tradition of tea, there's a whole notion of like the body effect or the body sensation that's produced by different types of teas. So if you're looking to trip in the most low-key, not dangerous way possible, just start drinking some tea.
From a horticulture perspective, tea is just fascinating. The culture behind tea, how ancient it is. Yeah, there's lots of. Maybe we should have a tea episode sometime.
Camellia sinensis.
Yes,
it's and like apparently the ethnobotanists believe that people started by just eating the tea leaves. And then they were like, oh, let's just steep this instead.
Yeah, we got fire now. We can boil some water,
Yeah, but black tea, white tea, green tea, they're all Camellia sinensis, just grown and treated in different ways. Mm-hmm. So
interesting fact.
Young trees, younger leaves, older leaves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, a tea episode would be good. I wonder if we could get somebody cool to come and talk about it that knows a lot about it.
If you know a lot about tea, we're shouting you out. We need some help. So
we need the tea on tea.
Shoot us an email.
Including, we could do one about like with that like regular, Camellia that tea, but also like herbal teas too could be a vibe. Annie's really big into herbal teas.
Alexis had the idea of edible plants. This is a tea to me is a form of I'm almost in that category, Alexis. So, sorry, Josh. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I don't know a lot about the cultivation of it, but because my first farm job, I was just like there doing things, but we probably had about like 200 row feet of like the tea plant. Like,
who might come on? Maybe this should be an after podcast, but just shout out to Among the Herbs, or Among the Oaks Farm over there. Sarah is, I spent some time abroad with her, but we talked about her on one of our CSA episodes because she runs an herb farm and she does some tea mixes. So, Sarah, if you're listening, I'm going to call. So.
Where was that? Was that in Georgia, Josh?
Yeah, South Georgia. So like right kind of along the coast within like a mile of the shore.
Hot heat.
Yeah, just I remember harvesting from it because they were big and we had a dehydrator and kind of a shed for the collection and dehydration of like tea herbs and stuff. And just cutting the little like tender growth leaves and dehydrating them and jarring them up. Yeah, I remember doing that a lot. Cool plant. It's
I'm
neat.
trying to grow Yope and Holly this year. I have to check and see if anything's come up yet.
Caffeine plant.
But I'm gonna,
Caffeine?
exactly. Woo, let's get jacked.
Yeah.
Nice.
That sounds fun. Awesome. Well, I love that. I love these ideas. We're brainstorming, but we're here to talk about irrigation and watering things today, primarily.
Plants
Watering tea leaves.
prefer water to tea usually.
I mean,
Correct.
yeah,
Manure
but you could, I mean,
tea.
you
Wait a
could
minute.
water them
Wait a
with
minute.
your tea. So I
But
know that.
electrolytes are what plants crave.
Yeah. You can put your tea bags in your worm bin.
Yeah.
So if they're the compostable kind. So
Man, can you imagine being the worm that comes across the tea bag and is like just gets jacked? I guess they probably don't have caffeine receptors, but let's just imagine that they do.
Right.
Transcendental
And
experience.
they're just like, oh my gosh, this is crossing my blood-brain barrier.
I
I'm
can
like
smell color.
self-aware now. What is all this dirt?
Yeah. We are all a worm.
Mine mostly survive off of coffee grounds and like espresso grounds, so mine are always jacked. Like
They've got
like
a rock band.
smoking cigarettes
Yeah,
and
yeah.
reading Sartre.
When I had a friend who was giving me a bunch for espresso grounds, I just have regular coffee grounds, and I swear I could see a huge difference on how quickly things turned over with the espresso grounds. Like I was like, oh, I gotta
Finer
feed you
grind.
already. Like
Yeah.
so.
Nice.
Yeah, getting jacked in there for whatever reason. But you know what else I'm jacked about? Fertigating and
trying to
watering.
continue pulling us back to the actual topic.
Yeah.
Worms eating espresso.
Right. Well, they can't have espresso without irrigation water.
That's right.
Speaking of irrigation water.
It's all a circle, folks. It's all a circle.
Yeah, we're coming up on that time of year where we need to be thinking about either getting irrigation set up or plants are going to start needing water here and there. I think sometimes this time of year, when plants aren't pushing a ton of leaves yet, they're not using a lot of water. And I always heard that people tended to overwater their gardens at the beginning of the season and massively underwater them as the season went on, because we like want to attend the little baby plants and people can drown them and stuff. But we don't want people to do that. We want people to do a great job, which is why we're talking about this now versus when the actual water starts flowing.
Right.
Irrigation for home gardeners. I believe it's an interesting topic for me because I believe home gardeners, especially, I mean, commercial horticulture, because of the value and the nature of the crop and the scale and, you know, the fact that it's commercial. Yeah, irrigation's a foregone conclusion. But for homeowners, it's always fascinating when I'm visiting or taking phone calls and they mention irrigation, because it seems like homeowners are at many different places on the way that they irrigate or don't irrigate. Some homeowners still don't irrigate gardens. I mean, they use a lot of mulches and stuff, but it's a great topic. But I believe there's a lot of variance as far as home scale versus commercial. Homeowners, you know, as I said, being at many different places and how and when and why they water.
It's funny you mentioned the commercial thing, because I know that there have been some extension folks in the surrounding region who have even still had to make a plea for people to think about irrigating their commercial crops like watermelons.
Yeah, watermelons, pumpkins. I work with people that, you know, on certain crops, certain horticulture crops, they still don't irrigate those regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, depending on your goals for the operation, but it is, yeah, I think there's a lot of people who think of it as putting a plant in the ground and the Mother Nature and the rain clouds will provide.
Right.
But you can,
which I mean, we're in a good climate, right? So it's like you
Yeah.
can get away a lot of the time without irrigating. It's not like we're out west, right?
Yep.
Yeah, where it's absolutely a must.
And not just the climate, we've got a soil that's really good at kind of like not drying out rapidly. Like down in Florida, where it's known to rain a lot, if they go like a week without rain, it's drought conditions. Like everything is extremely crunchy and it's gone. Like that sand just doesn't hold on to water.
Yeah, we talked
the way
about
ours does.
Talked about clay and sand, I think, a couple of episodes ago, and
we have the magical
Josh was
loam.
repping the sand.
I mean, I'm just trying to say,
really
I moved away from that to this for a reason.
Go toward the clay, Josh. Go toward the clay. Do you all want to maybe talk about some of the different systems that people can set up, or different kinds of approaches, technologies, whatever, and maybe start there?
Doesn't have to be high
Alexis had brought up this idea with like pulse irrigation, which I hadn't really heard of and had to look into. And so maybe you could at least talk about that. It's like, and it can we can talk about its difference with traditional systems
And then walk our way back from the advanced
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and
from this kooky idea from another
from this,
planet.
I mean, listen, it's something that I have been hearing about on some other podcasts and from some other big farms, and
Traitor.
it's
Well,
I'm
you
allowed
mentioned
to
There is only one
listen,
podcast.
so
The
commercial
one true
operation
pod.
sounds like.
but it sounds like, and I again am in no way an expert on this, but it sounds like the origins are from Australia, where they have a lot of water insecurity issues and a lot of drought conditions, but they still they actually grow a lot of cut flower crops, but they grow a lot of different stuff over there. And this idea of pulse watering, which is these short intermittent, like once every hour, twice every hour type thing for 10 minutes, or whatever. It depends on your soil, but these little 10-minute pulses every hour of water for primarily their annual crops. But I do think they're doing it on perennials, which I think for our area would not necessarily be the best. But in this case scenario, we'll talk about annuals. So they're giving them this irrigation, which is putting it right into the root zone, and not really allowing it to necessarily leach out into like a water table, because they're putting it right in the root zone and these short spurts so that the plant is able to just kind of take it right up whenever it needs it, and you're using a lot less water. And so
Right.
I'm seeing some things say 20, maybe 30% less water, which, reading UK did a little bit of research about this in the early 2000s, but let's see, it looks like 20% reduction on an acre of tomatoes is 500,000 gallons of water a season. So like it
Right.
really does make a difference if you need, to do something like that, if your soil supports it, if all these things. So it's an interesting idea. And I've heard a lot of people who have started using it feel like their crops perform better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they have any data to
Right. How
back
they
that
measure
up,
that.
but very
It passes the
experienced
vibe check.
growers, right,
Yeah.
are
Well,
passing the vibe check.
they're still getting production, right? So it's not
Right,
killing their plants; they're able to
right,
produce. And I would say, to be clear, the water savings is something that is compounding with. They're already on a drip irrigation system,
right.
right?
They're on
So
drip.
so they're
Yes.
already getting like those 90% savings over, like an overhead system or something like that. But then compounding like another 20% savings on
Right.
that with like this light, how I heard it characterized was a frequent and light irrigation cycles like
Mm-hmm.
throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
Is it true
Yeah.
that in Australia the water comes out of the irrigation counterclockwise
Yes.
Yes. Bernoulli effect.
instead of
Yes.
up here? Yeah.
It's absolutely true.
So Josh,
100%,
Josh, what were you going to say, Alexis?
100% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Josh, you mentioned drip irrigation. That's probably the most. I would wager to say it's the most common irrigation system in small scale production, both commercial and homeowner systems. I think when you get to bigger, you get things like center pivot and other kinds of irrigation that people do. But in a nutshell, what is drip irrigation? Is that something that you can use in a home garden or like a small scale production? Why do you care? A drip? My plants need more than a drip of water, don't they?
Right. Well, yeah, I would say that it is. I don't know how common it is, but it is very appropriate for definitely smaller scales, and even larger scale agriculture. But what we're talking about is you've got a pressurized water line that is flexible, that connects to, and we'll call that like the main line, and then you have a series of other pressurized tubes that sometimes they can be flat, or they're just really small tubes that have membranes or very small holes in them that drop water right at the plant root zone. So you're getting water right where the plant needs it. And by doing that, you're looking at tremendous water savings because you're not losing so much to evaporation. Like the oldest school system of irrigation was flood systems where you would dig trenches and flood them. And believe it or not, that is still used
Mm-hmm.
in really large agricultural systems in places that have water scarcity problems. Like I had seen it out in Southern California and Southern New Mexico. And you can deliver, I mean, if you have the water, you can deliver a lot of water to plants, and it can have this effect of suppressing other things. But the amount of water that is lost because it's not being delivered right to the root zone and instead is leaching out or evaporating out is pretty tremendous. Like
So
the
yeah.
estimates are above like 90 to 95% of the water that you're on the hook for is going completely not where you want it.
So if you're imagining like your garden, and if you laid out a square garden or a rectangular garden, one edge of it where all the that you're looking down all of the rows is going to have your main line, and then there's going to be a strip of irrigation line, T-tape, drip tape sometimes it's called, that goes down each row. And in theory you can plant a plant right where those long drip tapes have, like you were saying, those little holes. And if you turn it on and let it and watch for a while, you'll end up with these little circles of water that go down the row, and you could theoretically, plant into each of those. But Ray, you were talking about, you sometimes see people who have worked with the drip kits or something like that, and there's actually a little spaghetti tubing kind of individual thing.
Yeah, I'll back up just one step even before that, Brett. You ask what I see most common in gardens. I'd say hand watering. My goodness, on
Yeah.
small scale, we could even start with hand watering and work our way up from there. I still think it's the most common, followed by like soaker hosers. And there's a place for all of these types of watering. If it works for you, then you know what, as a homeowner, it works. But yeah, when we get up to the drip tape, which to me is sort of the third or fourth level, as far as occurrence that I see homeowners using that. But to me, it's either a film or tape that's designed to provide a uniform, continuous area of moisture along a row. Usually depending on your soil type, a couple of feet out, depending on how long you run the tape. So that's the first type. Like Josh, that's what he was talking about. That's, I guess, Josh, the most common commercially that we see, kind of drip tape, what we call drip tape. The other type of water delivery system would be an individual point source of delivery, what we call spaghetti tubes. A lot of times it's a single emitter that we can drop into something like a raised bed container and water a couple of pepper plants. And both of those systems have their place. And the great news for homeowners is that I'm seeing that widely available for homeowners on a small scale. It used to be that you had to buy 500, 1,000 feet of drip tape or they wouldn't sell it to you. Now you can buy small kits that are pretty incredible for home gardens in both types, both drip tape and drip emitters, individual emitters that, and then single emitters would be something. I'm trying to think of a use case scenario. You guys, the case that I keep coming back to is how I've used them is if I have individual containers on a patio or something of flowers or vegetables. So they both have their place in home gardens, and I've used both of them and really enjoyed both of them. But yeah, that's the two types to me, is the continuous run kind of tape and then the individual emitters.
The emitters and like whether they're on the end of spaghetti tubing or something that's directly into kind of that sub line, not necessarily a main line, are used often in greenhouse production for like hanging baskets, so that you can water everything up top. And then they might hand water the benches below them, so they'll be using those. But also vineyards will use them, and so they'll run that main line up actually high, and they'll drop the tubing down low, which helps prevent critters from necessarily like cutting through them in the winter to get to the water. And then I've seen them the same things on ground, like for blueberries and stuff that don't have a lot of feeder roots to go collect water. They really need water given to them directly at the base, and so they'll use either spaghetti tubing or emitters to put them right in. And the beauty of the emitters is that it's not a necessarily a predisposed spacing. And so like drip tape you can get, I think, at like 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch is usually the standard spacing you see. Well, if I've got my peonies or my blueberry bushes 3 feet apart, or maybe some of them are a little bit wonky at the end, I can actually punch holes myself and space them appropriately. So I'm not wasting any water in between where weeds are going to grow. I can put that water only to where the plants are.
Yeah, and that process, Alexis, is pretty modular, isn't it? That punching of holes, it's not as complicated as it sounds, is it?
No, it's not. I actually sat my master's project. I had to do that for greenhouse cucumbers, and so we were putting spaghetti tubing in, and I had to take it all. I took it all home and sat in front of the TV and put in emitters into the and attached the tubing to the emitters in front of the TV for hours on end. So it is very mindless. Your thumbs will hurt.
Didn't you get water all over your living room?
Huh? No.
Yes, she did. It was chaos.
I lived in a pool for a while. It was fine.
Oh, wow.
She's aquatic. Yeah, I think that punch hole kind of spaghetti tube system, that customizability, it also makes it, very good for like an established landscape kind of system, right? Where you got something set up and, you've got your plants that need to be irrigated in a completely non-uniform fashion, that you could set up a custom kind of spaghetti tubing with emitters system to irrigate it.
Now, with all of these, both the drip tape and the emitters, an important metric to look at when you're looking at that, and maybe a new concept for homeowners, is flow rate or gallons per hour or whatever rating is of the linear foot of the system that you're laying down, or in the case of emitters, they will each have an individual rating. But that's something good to know, because you kind of, what you're going to run into if you run too big of an area. Brett mentioned, well, is it a rectangular garden or is it a square? However big your garden is, if you size it too big, all of these systems work within a pressure range. And that's good to know also. Most of these systems are, I don't know, they're pretty low pressure. They're 20, 24 pounds. In fact, that's a component of the system, maybe a pressure reducer, but I have had homeowners find that out the hard way. They'll hook it up to a 50-pound straight into a municipal water supply, and it blows all of the low pressure system apart. But you'll see the documentation on these home systems are pretty good. The documentation is, and that's one thing it'll specify, is a little pressure reducer, and it's not expensive. It's a small little thing, but keep that in mind. But the one thing that you want to understand about your system is that there is different ratings, different flow rates or drip rates of these different types of components.
Yeah, and almost always, well, I guess it depends, but almost always you're going to have to step down the pressure from what's coming off of your house or whatever. It's going to be too much, because if you run it straight into the drip tape, it's just going to blow it up.
It will blow all the little fittings that Lexus sat there in her living room and put together mindlessly. Yeah.
There are certain emitters, usually like much higher flow rates, that do have a minimum PSI they need in order to actually like hit the area that they're doing. But yeah, Brett's totally right. For the most part, and especially with drip, you're going to be stepping down because they're made for lower flow.
Like reducing the pressure, basically. So you'll get a pressure regulator that will say that it'll take it from, you have to figure out what the pressure is off your house, but it'll take it from 30 PSI down to 15 PSI. And if you're coming off of something huge, sometimes you actually have to run multiple regulators, because there's only so much that one single regulator can do. But that's probably beyond the scope of what everybody's particularly.
If you've got like an 8-inch main line coming out of like a pump system, you got a guy for this.
You got.
I don't have to exfoliate in my shower because it just blasts the skin right off.
Also, if you just
shower.
panicked at all of these words that are happening, that can be really stressful. It's okay, and you're not going to break anything when we say it might blow it apart. It just means that like your lines
cap flies off and you're like, oh man.
It's something it can easily put back on, and then you go, oh, I need a pressure regulator. Or if you're like me, who always forgets or loses her pressure regulators, I just turn my spigot on half. Like sometimes the science.
You are the pressure regulator.
I am the pressure regulator. Sometimes the science is super sciencey, and sometimes it's just like, figure it, just do it.
And even if you got, if you're getting confused by flow rates and whether or not the PSI is affecting how much is coming out of an emitter, you can always do the thing of putting it over a bucket and timing the amount of time that you're going to run an irrigation cycle to see how much water you will apply.
Yeah.
At the very worst, if you oversize your system in your garden and you don't have the volume and flow coming from the tap, because pressure is one thing, but total volume is another. If you oversize the system, what that means is at the very end of your system, usually your emitters will not be emitting the same amount as at the beginning of the system. And you can see that just kind of pay attention when the soil's very dry. I'm assuming that most homeowners are not using plasticulture raised beds. They're probably installing some of these homeowner systems on bare soil, and just kind of pay attention to your area of moisture. And if that's not uniform, you kind of may have to go back and look at breaking your garden down into zones and only watering half of your garden at one time, so that you have good uniform pressure, and you don't have pressure drop off at the end of those lines, because they just won't get watered the same.
So what Ray's talking about, like, so for instance, when I had the big garden horticultural system set up in our backyard, that was basically a very, very small version of what a commercial drip tape system would look like. I think I had 8 or 10 50-foot long rows in the backyard. And so I would turn off 4 of them or 5 of them, water 5 rows, and then I would come back and turn the other ones off. So almost every step along the way has some sort of a valve that you can turn off and on.
And they're very affordable. I mean, for this, aren't they made for the system, Brett? This is really common. What do we call them? Quarter turn valves or whatever?
Quarter turn valves, yep. And it's the same way, like Alexis was talking about with the spaghetti tube. You get a little tool and you use it. It's like, I don't even know what it's like. Almost like a screwdriver or something, but it has little teeth on it, and you use it to punch these holes, and you pop things in. It's not super complicated. If you ever get the chance to go and check out, you can go, and if you're interested in doing this commercially or whatever, you can go and check out another farm or one of the research farm at UK or something, to just see how it's set up. You'll be like, oh, this isn't as complicated as these fools are making it sound.
Josh,
but it is hard to see it.
It's hard to describe.
Hard to do it without seeing it.
Yeah.
Josh, didn't you have a pub or a video or something on that?
Yeah, Brett and I made like a little 5-minute video on like simple drip irrigation systems. We'll put a link in the show notes. But
there's also a video with friends of the show, Jessica Besson and Jay Tucker from South Farm, talking about components of a horticultural irrigation system with different pieces. Is that the one you're talking about, Josh, or is that a different one?
Different.
Yeah. So we got multiple different videos.
There's some great videos out there, and you'll see how simple it really is. Once you look at the video, it kind of takes a lot of words to describe, but a very short video will have you putting your system together in no time.
A couple other technologies I want to get your all's take on. So one of them, we actually did. We mentioned the spaghetti tubing thing, I think, but we actually, when we were working, and I was working at the farm with Aaron Stancombe, and we were trying to get our carrots and beets and things to germinate, we actually played around with these little micro sprinklers that hooked on to the end of spaghetti tubing, and it's a little tiny sprinkler, and
like a mister,
sort of, but it would cast about 8 to 10 foot circle of a fine mist.
Foot or inch?
Foot.
Okay.
And so we would set it up on 2 beds. So it would, and then overlap them enough that it would kind of cover that entire area. Like the sprinkler itself was probably about, including the stake that went into the ground, maybe 12 inches tall.
Okay.
And we could run a series of maybe 6 or 8 of them off of a line going down, and they were actually really cool. We'll come back to this, but if you were watering something that had foliage on it and not germinating seed, it would be a little bit of a different kind of thing. But as far as that germination, it was pretty cool and relatively effective, at least in our experimentation there. But another one I wanted to get your all's take on is the soaker hose.
I love the soaker hose. I recommend a soaker hose all the time because I feel like it is as close as you can get to drip irrigation without the
it's like the least amount of stuff to adopt.
Yeah.
Hook up the hose to your thing.
Like,
you're good.
Part of me sometimes is like, man, can I just run soaker hoses on everything? Because, sometimes drip gets really annoying and I get weird leaks in places, and,
Doesn't
it's
soaker last longer too for you?
I mean,
drip emitters get stopped up for me all the time.
Yeah. So I don't know, but I recommend them for homeowners and for small gardeners who are not quite ready to make a leap into drip soaker hoses all the time.
Right.
So for the uninitiated, can you give a description of what a soaker hose is?
It looks like a garden hose, but it's black, and it's it's made of, I guess, kind of like a web, almost like a webbing, and basically water just seeps through the entire, like around the whole thing very slowly. Yeah, it looks like it's sweating. That's excellent.
Like if you took a garden hose and used the thumbtack to punch 1,000,000 holes into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It just slowly kind of gurgles out. Sweats is a really good way to put it. And then it just does it the entire length of the hose. And
Now, why do
Right.
you like that so much better than like one of the options we haven't talked about is overhead sprinklers? But why do you like the soaker hose, or do you like it better than overhead sprinklers?
for our soils, for clay soils, I like something right at the root zone. So not only because, disease issues and stuff that Brett alluded to earlier with the sprinkler system, but so keeping disease off, but you're not wasting as much. You don't need as high of a pressure. We always say with sprinklers, you kind of need a higher pressure. And I use sprinklers. Like, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
When
they have their place. Sure.
they have their place, sure. But yeah, I like the water going right where I tell it to go because I have
And on a
control
large
issues.
scale, that evaporation is a huge deal. Like if you were at a golf course,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the evaporation is a big deal to them. Well, it is any operation that's using like traveling gun type irrigation out west. I mean, they just have to account for a certain percentage loss.
Yeah.
Anytime you can deliver the water straight to the soil, A plus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so one of the reasons I like a soaker hose, and I actually don't have any that I use right now, but it's maybe not horticulturally optimal in this same way that drip tape is,
Mm-hmm.
because drip tape takes forever to
Mm-hmm.
water something. Like you have to leave it on, and then you
Gallons
forget
per
that you left it
hour
on,
or whatever.
and
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
great because it's a little bit slower, and Mother Nature or whatever. But the soaker hose, like especially if you're putting it out to like a very select area and you're able to overlap the soaker hose a little bit,
Flower beds or anything like that. Yeah.
it's so much, it feels to me at least, so much faster because you just have a bunch of holes that are leaking the water out,
Yeah.
and it's just easier to go out, turn it on for a few minutes, let it rip,
Mhm.
and then turn it back off and not have to not have to set a
Well,
timer or
yeah, and
wake up in the middle of the night and think, did I turn the water off?
So many
when you're
times
going to
I've
use
flooded
it in a
things.
place, it's like you can have it set up in a
Yeah.
few minutes. You don't need to like go get a bunch of components or anything like that. It's just the hose. You connect it to your other hose. You turn it on. Boom.
I think it's also either easier to find, as far as that was
Mhm.
one of the funny things when I went from working in the vegetable research stuff and having, we would go to these horticulture suppliers and get huge amounts, and we would have those things on hand. When I
Right.
moved to being at home, I was like, where do I go and get like 50 feet of drip? Or, I guess I had more than
Right.
50
Right.
feet, but like it was just harder to source some of those things that are
Yeah.
such industry standards. Whereas a soaker
Mhm.
hose, like you could probably go and pick one of those up the same day at a garden center.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And
And
You
they
that's
have
see the
like
handy.
sales
kits.
guy and be like, "Look, I'm running an 8th-acre garden. Hook me up."
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
can, the soaker hoses, they have like kits now where you can like cut your
Mhm.
own, like to fit, and you put your
Make
own
your
little
own.
things in
Yeah, it's
there.
great.
I've done those, and they're easy. You just twist them
Very
together. You
easy.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're just if you can use a garden hose, you can use a soaker hose, and I think that's part of the reason I like it versus, with drip, if you've never done it before, it can be
Daunting.
exhausting to think about.
Yes.
It can be
Now, you
Mhm.
daunting.
guys
Yeah.
mentioned time being a factor. Some systems take a long time to water. Soaker hoses, things like that take less time to water. Do any of you all use timers?
I've worked in operations where we did. I don't use one personally right now, but
Yeah.
yeah, they're brilliant, right? I mean, it's like the problem of, oh, well, you forget you left it on, all those kind of things. You can just turn a dial for the really simple ones, right? It's something
Mm-hmm.
that can hook up right to your hydrant, and you can
Mm-hmm.
just set it for a time, and it'll
Yeah.
mechanically close when it's done, and
I like
that's
the
pretty
mechanical ones. I
nice.
mean, I know there's
Hmm.
battery versions, but then I'm always worried about the batteries. I've used
Sure.
both types for home, especially if I'm going on vacation and I don't have a friend or family member that's really close and handy to kind of check on things for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always loved raised beds and containers, and those just need to be watered. I mean, every day, just about in the summer for certain crops that you may have
Mhm.
in there. And that's where timers have really saved me. That's where the battery timers are so good because they don't take any intervention. You don't have to crank them over to 30 minutes and let it
Yeah, it's
mechanically
just a time of
tick down.
day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So timer technology has gotten really, really good. And I've come to trust the major brands,
Mhm.
pretty good degree of trust in those. I do check on them every now and again. You absolutely need to check on components like that. But yeah, timers can be a great thing. But you don't want to arbitrarily set a timer and be irrigating in the middle of a rainstorm. So
Right.
they take a little bit of intervention and common sense, but yeah, here lately the timers have just gotten better and better over time.
I have explored the like smartphone based timers and things like that, and I haven't pulled the trigger on getting one yet, but I have considered it, but I've never worked with timers.
I've never worked with those on like a home scale. I know commercially they've been available for some time. You can do some things there, but for homeowners, that's pretty neat.
Well, Ray, I would just get something that would be for like 100 acres and then just use it on.
Well, I don't know how many feet did you say you were irrigating?
Yeah, like
before?
it's got
You
an
were
eighth of an
almost
acre. It's
commercial.
going to define it into like 16 zones that each have their own irrigation profile. It's like, oh, the even numbered zones need to be skipped today.
That really appeals to a part of my brain, though, you guys. That really does appeal to a part of my brain.
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I love that. Zones.
There was I worked on a research plot, so we're talking like very small scale for kind of irrigating containers that were, subject to a bunch of different treatments. And we had one of those. I mean, I don't want to say one of the I was about to say the name of the brand, but kind of one of the more complex controllers where you have different zones and you can set up a timing cycle, but that also has like an instant like kind of bypass for like if there's a rainfall event, you can just walk out there and hit a button and it'll skip like the next however many. They're pretty. I mean, the first time I saw one was I had already been involved in ag for, I don't know, 8 years, and I was like, "What is this? This is amazing."
I go back and forth between them because I can't find one that doesn't leak, and that really irritates me because which isn't a big deal if you're like, I'm just setting it for 2 hours and then I'm going to come shut the water off, but it's just to like help and make sure in case I forget. But I know with like the pulse watering, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of people are setting up essentially you're pulsing on a timer, right? And so they have those timers, they're always on. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong that my stuff leaks so bad. But
like it's watering too much, or
no, like the connections.
No, like the connections are.
I think now because these are commercial systems, and we've had this discussion with new commercial producers, these things are kind of watertight, but they drip.
They're more like hardwired in versus like just screwing them on
because they're so fast to modify, and you're essentially just punching in a barbed connector. They're not perfect. They will leak some. Especially like spaghetti type, what we're calling spaghetti tubing that goes into like a smaller hard tube. Yeah, there's leaks in these systems. And I know what you mean, Alexis, because I expect everything to be watertight and efficient, but some of these systems you're going to have leaks in.
My timer is that I put an obnoxious like bracelet or something on my wrist until I shut the water off.
And circulation, and when my hand goes in them, it's
when
time
my
to turn
circulation
off.
is cut off, the water needs to be cut off.
It's called the amputation alert.
When I start feeling lightheaded, I need to turn the water off.
When I lose
Once the gangrene sets in, I'm really in trouble.
Right. Then I flooded everything at the gangrene time. Yeah.
Well, so is that where you're getting your leaks? Is where you're getting those punch-ins, or like at the actual connection?
Listen.
All the things.
I have leaks everywhere. And part of that drip system, some of it is probably I just need a new head hose, like a new main line, so to speak.
Are you using like what we call lay flat, Alexis? Or?
I do like orchard tubing, which is like that harder tubing.
The rigid.
That's just, I've always done that. I don't know why, but that's just what has always.
Me too.
At those connection points, I always like throw in more gaskets.
Well, I know, but you're going right into like a plastic.
Yeah.
There's I have them there. Then I have them at the, where I'm turning on the water, the actual spigot.
The other thing about the timer, like the freak, I mean, I guess if you're using a timer in the same way that you would if you were turning the water off and on, like the off and on pulsing of the pressure off and on to me, like is going to loosen the connections over time even more. It's like
a hammer effect or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't played with it, but I'm not exactly sure. But maybe one other technological kind of side of things before we move on to some tips about approaches to watering. So we've talked about, I think, a whole episode about rain barrels. But any sort of general things you want to say about irrigating with rainwater as far as how to do it or things to consider? I have talked about, so I do have electric pumps that pump water out of my rain barrels and pressurize it up to hose level pressure or beyond. I do all. I don't grow any sort of annual horticulture crops for the most. A few, I guess, but I hand water everything now myself at my house, and most of that is coming out of rain barrels that's pumped out. But if you don't have a pump, what about dealing with the lower flow? Any sort of tips or tricks or anything like that?
Yeah, we touched bases on that on an earlier episode. I know that you alluded to, Brett. And then, there's some basic principles you have to have in place, like change in elevation. Is that what you're getting at, Brett?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
to
Yeah.
get pressure, you have to have elevation drop, and you gain so many pounds of pressure over so many feet. And there's formulas for that we can help you out with. Or you can go and listen to the episode where we covered that
yeah.
in
I would encourage you to go
great
back and
detail.
find the rain barrel
Yeah, yeah.
episode. Yeah,
But
and one thing
there's some passive systems. Yeah.
on mine where I have the pump set up, I'm able to very quickly switch to city water when I run out of water barrel water, because that's one thing I think if you're really serious about irrigating and you're wanting to use some rainwater, that's great. But make sure you also have a plan for being able to use another source of water, because when we have a drought, surprise, the rain barrels also don't fill up.
Right,
And,
right.
these different water sources have different qualities. If you're in a bigger city or a metropolitan area that's known to have a certain acidity level for surface water, you need to know that. Just on the flip side of that, if you're using a municipal water source here in Kentucky, they tend to be very basic. And commercially, that really causes some issues. With our greenhouse operations, and we have to account for that, and sometimes through acidifying processes, acid injection, so on and so forth. But that's on larger scales. I guess my point being is that you have to consider the water source when
Definitely.
you're, salt content,
Mhm.
acidity levels or lack thereof. All of those things are important, just to kind of know a little bit about the source that you're using, well water versus surface water versus municipal.
Yeah, to ground truth that a little bit. So, my naturally, I have a pH meter for the small
as
Naturally,
system that
as
I.
one does.
Yeah,
data collection.
and so our rainwater can be between a pH of 6.5 and 7.2, which is
Nice.
very
So not too bad. Yeah.
slightly acidic. But our or like our municipal water runs like 8.4 to 9.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
antagonistic
I
to
actually
certain
do
uptakes.
acidify, but
Oh, you do?
I will fill the rain barrels and acidify that water.
What are
It's
you using as
really
a
dorky.
homeowner? What source? Like, is there like an easy
It just
source that
drops like a
I
car battery in there.
I dechlorinate it and then I add vinegar.
gotcha? Yep.
And so the reason
Natural source.
that I try to I dechlorinate it first so that the chlorine doesn't buffer the,
Mhm.
because I tried it before. I would just add vinegar and it would adjust the pH correctly, and then I'd come back and test the pH 2 days later, and it would have been back up again because anyway, doesn't I will it's way down the rabbit hole of where you need to go. But the point is there are different pHs, and like perennial plants especially, some of them really like a little bit more acidic. Most plants like things a little bit in that acidic
Yes.
to neutral range. So anyway,
You'll
so
see some nutrient deficiencies, and yet you're pretty sure you have fertilized adequately. And sometimes that can be part of the issue, is just something's interfering with uptake, or
for whatever reason, my plants all seem to prefer rainwater. So when I can use rainwater, they really are happy, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But also, if you don't run out of rainwater, then what do you do? So I wanted to put in the prepper style, 2,500 gallon tank that Annie shot down. So
Mhm.
I'm
Wanted to
stuck
build
with,
like a water tower in your backyard.
yeah, tear down the garage and replace it with a big reservoir.
Mhm. Nice 20,000 gravity tank.
Just get a cistern dug. It's fine.
Exactly, exactly.
No big deal.
So what about? I mean, so we've talked about the water splash and or water on the leaves as a not so good thing. And so briefly, what's the deal with that?
Disease.
Yeah.
Anytime you have, especially soil splash,
Mhm.
moisture's bad. Soil splashed moisture is generally worse because that's where a lot of the diseases reside. So there's a ladder effect with rain splash. There's a ladder effect with diseases and rain splash regardless, because a lot of diseases need, dark cycle and moisture to reproduce or spread, and you're creating that environment. So time of day matters, and method of water application matters. So if you're applying the water to the soil and you're applying it, let's say earlier in the day, you're really eliminating a lot of those conditions that allow for disease spread. The worst case scenario, you're using a sprinkler system at night, or going with wet leaf, tissue into the evening.
Right.
That's the worst case scenario.
Why and why is that?
Just diseases. It's a favorable environment for disease transmission and spread, because a lot of the
Especially
diseases, once
fungus,
again,
especially fungal diseases.
funguses, bacteria, there's certain bacteria, but a lot of the funguses, they need that dark cycle, dark and the
Cold
moisture.
and wet or cool and
Yeah,
wet.
just
Ooh.
all the
Yeah.
bad things together. I just want to throw up a disease triangle right now. That's plant pathology is coming back to me, but yeah, that's time of day is important when you water. A lot of times we'll set my timer to be early in the morning, but if I'm going overhead watering, I do that early in the morning because there's some benefit to knocking. Because when you water, you knock the dew off plants, and that causes actually the plants to dry quicker. And golf courses use this concept all the time. It's pretty interesting. So there's lots of benefits. If you have to water over the head, do that early in the morning. You have less evaporation also. So you get all the benefits. If that's your preferred method or the only method that you have, do that in the mornings.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, right? I guess it was last year, maybe it was the year before, but I think last year when we had a really long, prolonged period of drought and not a lot of rainfall, and I'm irrigating in the midst of that on like a lot of my plants. That was like the best my plants have ever looked
Oh
because they're
yeah,
getting the water right at the
yeah.
roots and they're not getting any on the leaves. It's like, man,
No diseases, no
I like
early
the Central
blight.
Valley,
Yeah.
California, like
Yeah. Gone
pump the water
Mediterranean.
in and
It's
yeah,
amazing, especially with commercial producers when they have these dry years. It's usually a low disease pressure year for a lot of
definitely.
these diseases because you just don't get transmission.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
What about, so you mentioned time of day as a part of the consideration?
Yeah, early. I try not to water in the evenings. Going into the evening too late. Early to midday, and then that's when I kind of knock off my watering operations personally, especially on a commercial scale.
What about knowing when to water?
That's tougher. I mean, there's lots of. I know this is going to get you guys in the fields, but there's lots of tools and data driven sort of gadgets to know when
Mhm.
to water. They measure water like
Yeah.
aerometers and things like that are used commercially, that are very, very important on a commercial scale. And some of those tools are becoming available to homeowners. But a real simple test that I use is the screwdriver test or the finger test. First of all, I have to know a little bit about the plant that I'm working with. Tomato versus something like corn, you have to know the average depth of roots, where most of the roots that are, performing water uptake, you have to know kind of what depth those are at. And then you kind of want to water in general to that depth.
Mm.
And I know there's lots of new and emerging systems that are like micro emitters, micro irrigation, pulse irrigation. But if I had my choice, I would water thoroughly and more deeply on a crop like tomatoes rather than, frequently and at a more shallow depth.
Sure. But
Um,
kind of like more what is done for trees, things in the landscape, things that are going to be there longer.
yes,
It's like the
yes.
opposite of pulse systems where you water less
Yeah.
frequently but deeply.
They're not that's not a very sophisticated method of watering, but it works very well for homeowners on a small scale. They're not using tens of thousands of gallons of water at a
Sure.
time. So, if in doubt, just kind of water deeply and less often.
Mhm.
And that seems to be a good general strategy. I know on flowers, Alexis, I see people outside watering like flowers like almost every day. I mean, is that more common with like on flowers, or just flowers? Flower lovers love their flowers. Is that what's going on?
I think flower lovers love their flowers.
I
Yeah.
think so. And I mean, why not? Because they're beautiful, things that are out there growing.
Do
Why
you want
not?
When
your friends to go thirsty, Ray?
Depends how well I like my friends, I guess. I do not want
depends
St.
what they're
Patrick's
drinking,
Day.
right?
Yeah, St. Patrick's Day was not far behind us. So, no, I don't want my
Right.
friends to be thirsty.
Cool.
Yeah, there's some
Well,
interesting research around like that kind of when to irrigate. I was on like a longer term water research kind of grant, but one of the terms was this idea of what they call deficit irrigation. And this is for very large kind of growers that are growing horticultural crops, but it's knowing your individual crop. And then they have these essentially a local weather station that they combine with an understanding of what is the evapotranspiration rate, like how much water is moving through the plant column, and then they water to replace just that.
Yeah, it's a replacement
It's
strategy.
wild, yeah. Because on this farm that was, several hundred acres, there was just a building, and that housed like their weather station and a computer that just calculated
Lots
when
of
they
data.
needed to run irrigation cycles to give that like quarter inch or half inch back.
Yeah, and I forget, guys. The UK was one of their resources. It's called a simple calculations for small drip irrigation systems, and I'm going to have to go look that up. I forget who put that together. Josh, that wasn't you, was it?
No, that was Brent Rowell, and it's
Okay.
HO 122.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good resource we need to put in the show notes.
Yeah, I think as a supplement to the screwdriver or finger test, and just full disclosure, Ray was born one of his fingers as a screwdriver. It's a rare condition, but
it's a flat screwdriver or a 4-way.
Yeah. And if you're Brett, you use a tensiometer, which you of course already own.
Yeah, well, I was going to say I do have a soil moisture sensor that I do. It's not the tensiometer is more like you install it and then go and reference it, but I actually have one that's more like a probe. And it's pretty good. It does a pretty good job where you can kind of spot test moisture. So there are supplementary, and that's just a homeowner inexpensive one that I got online. Yeah, I also have a light meter to see like the intensity of light.
Meter.
It's really cool because people talk about this concept of partial shade, but we don't really define exactly what that is. And so anyway,
we do in houseplants.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't mean, I meant the other we, not me and you per se.
Oh, not you.
That's a good point. Real quick, Alexis, what's your elevator pitch for educating someone on how to water their houseplants?
When I told your wife this, she did not like it. If you are the person who likes to water things on a schedule, plants are not for you. Okay, like you don't drink water on a schedule necessarily. You drink it when you're thirsty.
She hasn't spoken to you since you said that.
No.
But I usually tell people, I want you to water all your plants really deeply so that they're heavy and there's water falling out the bottom of the pot. And then I want you to hold that pot and feel how heavy it is. And when it's much lighter than that, you need to water again. Like, it's honestly the best way I can tell you, because the plants that you have by a heat register, if we're talking house plants, are going to be different than the plant that's 5 feet away, but they're in the same room, but this one's by the heat register, so it's going to need water more often. Or if you have a Hoya versus an orchid versus all these plants like different things. So the one way in all of the years I have been growing houseplants and working in greenhouses, you can truly tell is either you wait till it wilts, and at that point the plant is stressed, or you learn to pick up that plant and see how heavy the pot is. And I know that sounds silly, but the finger putting the finger down in there, I mean, that works too, but I use some shallow pots, and that's not always the same. I don't know, so I go back and forth with that method for houseplants. But learn what it feels like when that pot is fully drenched, and then you will know what it feels like when it's light. Like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. Okay.
You wait until it wilts and then kind of hold it again, and then
you could do that. Yeah. If like you're really not sure, and you could do that. But
houseplants are tough for me because some houseplants do really well inside. When I bring certain plants in, like pothos, the thing continues to actively grow like crazy, whereas other plants over there, like ivies and stuff, their growth rate really slows. Right. So you have to know each plant.
And like in the winter, I'm watering my houseplants once a month, but in the summer, I might be doing it once a week. And so sometimes it's every 6 weeks in the wintertime, depending on where that plant is located and its growth.
Type of soil.
So that's why it's really hard to say. And the only universal I can tell you is to figure out what it feels like when that plant is fully drenched, and you'll tell the difference.
Just ask it, Brett. Just ask the plant.
Learn to speak plant, and everything will be okay.
I do think people in the garden and and houseplants and other things, people tend to fall into a category of overwaterer or underwaterer, just like as a personality type.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of it is like figuring out which one of those you are.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of crisis do you want to deal
and
with?
then adjusting back. But I do think there is sort of like this getting to know it and read it and learn it. And people say in bonsai that like the hardest thing to learn is proper watering, because it just it's like a level of nuance and kind of all the contextual factors you were saying, Alexis, of what kind of day it's been, or what, what time of year it is, or what type of plant it is, or even that particular plant tends to be a thirstier pothos or whatever.
How cold it is outside.
Just a bizarre kind of. I also did not know that the Georgetown mascot was a houseplant, Georgetown Hoyas. So
we're always learning stuff on this pod.
They have first time for everything.
Did not know that.
But yeah, I do think that that's another aspect of it, that you have to just, even with the garden stuff, you have to kind of learn and understand. It's always funny to see a person who's been doing it for a while. That's almost, it feels like they have like a spidey sense that tingles. It's like, oop, I need to get up there. Those things are going to need water. And it's funny because once you get to that level, you're like, oh yeah, it's nothing crazy, but it is magical to someone who hasn't
like, how
mastered
did
it
you
yet.
know to do that? And you're like, I don't know. I can't explain
it. The plant looks sad. What do you want?
It looks like it always does, but it's sad. It told me.
Couldn't you hear their screams?
Awesome. Cool. Well, any lasting thoughts then as we wrap this up? We always think episodes will be short, sweet, to the point where like, oh, we won't have a ton to say on something like this. And then we're like 15 minutes into an episode and we're like, oh yeah, we actually have a lot to say. So anyways, that will be good. Cool. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Feel free to message us on Instagram. You can follow us there at Horticulture Podcast. You can also shoot us an email. That's in the show notes. It's long, so I won't read it all out here, but we do read those. We do see everything and check it. And we really appreciate you all reaching out with questions and thoughts. And we enjoy it. It makes us feel, it makes me feel good. I'm sure I feel like I can speak for everybody. My phone is ringing in my current office. As you can hear, it's springtime, so it's popular. And I have no idea how to mute it because it's a new phone. So bear with me here, people. But anyways, we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will continue to grow plants and grow anything really you want. We don't talk about animals on here, but you could be into that if you want to. But continue to grow with us, and that you will join us next time. Have a great one.